Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. The Meridian Observatory perched on the mountain like a technological prayer to the cosmos, its massive radio telescope pointed toward the Andromeda Galaxy in humanity's endless search for signs of intelligent life. Dr. Michael Kane found the irony amusing as he worked alone in the control room at 2 in the morning, surrounded by instruments worth millions of dollars designed to detect alien communications while he survived on vending machine coffee and the kind of optimism that made people choose careers in theoretical astrophysics. At 28, Michael had already developed a reputation for being either incredibly lucky or completely disaster-prone, depending on how you looked at it. His colleagues at the university joked that he had a guardian angel working overtime, car accidents that somehow left him without a scratch, muggings that got interrupted by convenient police patrols, food poisoning that missed him while taking down his entire research team. Michael attributed it all to statistical probability and the kind of dumb luck that balanced out somewhere in the cosmic equation. Tonight felt different, though. The radio telescope's data streams were picking up patterns that violated everything he understood about natural cosmic radiation. Instead of the random electromagnetic noise that filled the universe, he was detecting organized pulses, coordinated sequences, and what looked suspiciously like intentional communication protocols. "Either I'm looking at the greatest discovery in human history," he muttered to his coffee mug, "or I've finally cracked under the pressure of too many late nights and not enough human interaction." The patterns intensified around midnight, and Michael realized he wasn't looking at radio signals anymore. Through the observatory's optical telescope, he could see lights moving across the night sky with the kind of purposeful coordination that definitely wasn't meteorological. They moved in formation, performed impossible 90-degree turns, and seemed to be searching for something with the methodical precision of a cosmic search and rescue operation. Michael's scientific training warred with his survival instincts as one of the lights broke formation and descended toward the forest below the observatory. Every rational part of his brain screamed that investigating unknown aerial phenomena alone in the middle of the night was exactly the kind of decision that got people abducted by aliens or eaten by interdimensional predators. But his curiosity had always been stronger than his common sense, which probably explained why he'd chosen a career that involved staring at empty space and hoping for miracles. He grabbed his emergency kit, a flashlight that had seen better decades, and his cell phone, because if he was going to make a spectacularly poor life choice, he might as well document it. The hike through the forest took 20 minutes of stumbling over roots and questioning his decision-making abilities, guided by a soft glow filtering through the trees ahead. What he found in the clearing wasn't a crashed meteorite or a weather balloon or any of the mundane explanations he'd been hoping for. It was a spacecraft. The craft was roughly the size of a compact car but shaped like a teardrop made of liquid starlight, its hull gleaming with materials that seemed to bend light around them in ways that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Steam or something very much like it rose from various points along its surface, and Michael could hear the kind of electronic humming that suggested complex systems slowly shutting down after what had obviously been a very bad day. As he approached, a section of the hull dilated like an iris, revealing an interior filled with soft blue light and technology that looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured. And sitting in what might have been a pilot's seat, injured and bleeding silver fluid that definitely wasn't human blood, was a woman. She looked entirely human except for her eyes, which were the deep violet color of nebulae in deep space photographs, and her hair, which seemed to shift between silver and gold depending on how the light hit it. She wore something that resembled a flight suit made from fabric that moved like liquid metal, and despite the obvious pain she was experiencing, she possessed the kind of otherworldly beauty that made Michael wonder if he'd suffered a concussion during his hike and was currently hallucinating his perfect alien encounter. "Michael Kane," she said, her voice carrying an accent he couldn't place but speaking English with perfect fluency, "I am Lyra of the Celestial Watchers. I am your hidden guardian, and I have been protecting you for the past 8 years of your life." Michael stared at her, his brain trying to process the impossibility of what he was hearing while simultaneously cataloging the various ways this situation could kill him. "I'm sorry, what?" "The car accident on Highway 101 when you were 20 years old," Lyra continued, apparently determined to deliver her entire exposition despite the silver blood dripping onto her impossibly advanced spacecraft. I redirected the drunk driver's vehicle using electromagnetic pulses. The food poisoning at the conference in Prague, I synthesized antidotes and introduced them into your coffee over a period of 3 days. The elevator malfunction at the Blackstone building. Hold on, Michael interrupted, pulling out his phone and opening his calculator app while an alien woman bled exotic fluids in front of him. You're telling me that my statistically improbable survival rate over the past 8 years wasn't actually statistical at all? Lyra blinked her violet eyes, clearly not having expected this response to her dramatic revelation. You're calculating probability distributions. Now. The odds of surviving that many near-death experiences without intervention would be approximately. Michael's fingers flew over his phone screen, 1 in 47,000. Which I always thought was suspiciously high, but I attributed it to confirmation bias and selective memory. Michael Kane, Lyra said with what sounded like exasperation, I have just revealed that I am an extraterrestrial guardian who has been secretly protecting you for nearly a decade. Perhaps we could discuss the mathematical implications after we address the fact that I am currently bleeding to death in a forest clearing. Michael looked up from his phone, suddenly registering that she was right about the bleeding to death part. Her silver blood was pooling on the forest floor, and her impossibly beautiful face was growing pale in a way that suggested urgent medical attention was required. Right, sorry. First aid. He knelt beside her spacecraft, acutely aware that his Boy Scout training had not covered alien physiology. So when you say you've been protecting me, you mean like, watching me? All the time? Not all the time, Lyra replied, wincing as Michael examined what appeared to be a gash across her shoulder. We monitor multiple subjects across various species. I check on you approximately 6 times per day, more frequently when you engage in your species' tendency toward self-destructive behavior. Self-destructive behavior. Rock climbing without proper safety equipment. Eating gas station sushi. Attempting to fix electrical problems yourself instead of calling professionals. Lyra's expression suggested she'd been keeping a very long list. Your species seems to view unnecessary risk-taking as a recreational activity. Michael found himself laughing despite the surreal circumstances. So you're telling me I have an alien nanny who's been keeping me from Darwin myself out of existence? I prefer the term guardian, Lyra said with wounded dignity, then immediately undercut it by adding, though your assessment is not entirely inaccurate. As Michael attempted to apply human first aid to alien injuries using a kit designed for camping mishaps rather than intergalactic medical emergencies, he became aware of a low electronic humming coming from Lyra's spacecraft. The sound was growing more urgent, and lights were beginning to flash in patterns that seemed distinctly alarm-like. Lyra, he said carefully, should I be concerned about those warning signals? Her violet eyes widened with something that looked very much like panic. The emergency beacon. My ship's automated systems are calling for extraction. She struggled to sit up, silver blood making her flight suit gleam like liquid starlight. Michael, you need to leave. Now. When my people come looking for me, they will find evidence of contact, and that will put you in more danger than I have ever protected you from. Michael looked at her, this impossibly beautiful alien woman who claimed to have been secretly caring for him for 8 years, and realized that despite the complete insanity of the situation, he didn't want to leave her alone and injured in the forest. What if I don't want to leave? He asked. Lyra stared at him with an expression of complete bewilderment. Michael Kane, you have just discovered that extraterrestrial life exists, that you have been under covert surveillance, and that your entire understanding of your own life has been fundamentally incorrect. The appropriate response is fear, followed by an urgent desire to distance yourself from the situation. Maybe, Michael said, helping her to her feet despite her protests. But I'm a scientist, and you're the greatest discovery in human history. Also. He paused, surprised by his own honesty. I've been alone most of my life, and finding out that someone has been caring about what happens to me, even secretly, is probably the best news I've gotten in years. As they made their way back toward the observatory, Lyra leaning on his shoulder while her ship's emergency beacon painted the forest in urgent flashes of blue light, Michael reflected that his legendary luck might finally be changing. Whether that was good luck or bad luck remained to be seen, but for the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel like he was facing the universe alone. Michael's cabin sat in splendid isolation 15 minutes from the observatory, surrounded by pine trees and a kind of profound silence that made city people nervous. He'd chosen the location specifically for its distance from human civilization, though he was beginning to realize that isolation hadn't protected him from anything, it had simply given his alien guardian more privacy for her surveillance operations. "This is where you live?" Lyra asked as he helped her through the front door, her violet eyes taking in the modest interior with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was seeing it for the first time despite years of monitoring his activities. "You sound surprised. Haven't you been watching me for 8 years? I observe from a distance to minimize contamination of your natural behavioral patterns," she explained, settling carefully onto his couch while he rummaged through his kitchen for anything that might serve as alien first aid. Direct observation of private spaces would be inappropriate. Michael paused in his search through the medicine cabinet. "So you've been protecting me for 8 years, but you've never actually been inside my house?" "Correct. I maintain professional boundaries." Lyra's tone suggested this was important to her, though Michael couldn't help noticing the way she was examining his bookshelf with obvious curiosity. "Though I must say, your living space is smaller than our behavioral models predicted." "Sorry to disappoint your alien databases," Michael said, returning with a first aid kit that looked pitifully inadequate for treating someone who bled silver. "I'm a simple man with simple needs. Books, coffee, a place to think about the universe without people interrupting me every 5 minutes." "That explains your resistance to romantic partnerships," Lyra observed, then immediately looked like she wished she could take the words back. Michael stared at her. "You've been monitoring my dating life?" "I monitor all aspects of your welfare that could impact your survival probability. Emotional trauma can lead to self-destructive behavior, which increases my workload." She was attempting clinical detachment, but Michael could see color rising in her pale cheeks. Apparently, alien embarrassment looked remarkably similar to the human variety. "How much do you know about my dating life?" "I know that you terminated your relationship with Dr. Sarah Williams because she wanted to move to Denver, and you ended things with Jessica Palmer because she disapproved of your career focus, and you stopped seeing Maria Santos after she." "Okay, that's enough." Michael held up his hand, feeling his face grow warm. "So not only have I been under alien surveillance, but my guardian has basically been keeping a file on my romantic failures." "They weren't failures," Lyra said quietly. "They were incompatibilities. None of those women understood what makes you remarkable." The sincerity in her voice caught Michael off guard. He'd been approaching this entire situation with scientific detachment and nervous humor, but something in Lyra's tone made him look at her more carefully. She wasn't just reciting behavioral data, she was expressing an opinion based on years of observation. "What makes you think I'm remarkable?" he asked. Lyra was quiet for a moment, her violet eyes focused on her hands. When she spoke, her voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there during her clinical explanations. "You spend your nights searching for signs of life in the universe not because you want to be famous or because you need to prove anything, but because you genuinely believe that finding other forms of consciousness would make the universe a less lonely place. You put coins in expired parking meters for strangers. You remember the names of everyone who works at the observatory, from the director to the maintenance staff. She stopped, looking embarrassed again. "I what?" "You talk to the stars sometimes, when you're alone at the telescope. You tell them about your day, about discoveries you've made, about problems you're trying to solve. Most humans see the universe as empty space filled with distant objects. You see it as a place full of potential friends you haven't met yet." Michael felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "You've been listening to me talk to myself for 8 years. Your solitary conversations indicate a level of empathy and optimism that our behavioral scientists found unusual." Lyra met his eyes, and he saw something there that looked like fondness mixed with professional concern. Also, you have a tendency to work through complex problems by explaining them to imaginary audiences, which suggests an admirable commitment to clear thinking. Or it suggests I'm slowly losing my mind from too much isolation. That was one of our initial hypotheses, Lyra admitted with a slight smile. But our analysis concluded that you're simply someone who needs intellectual companionship more than most humans realize. As Michael began cleaning Lyra's wounds with supplies designed for human biology, he found himself thinking about the implications of everything she'd revealed. Can I ask you something that's probably going to sound paranoid? Given that you've just discovered you've been under covert alien surveillance, paranoia seems entirely reasonable. How much of my life has actually been my own choice? I mean, if you've been preventing accidents and illnesses and, I don't know, redirecting drunk drivers. How do I know that anything I've accomplished was really me? Lyra winced, and Michael couldn't tell if it was from the first aid or from the question. I intervene only to prevent harm, never to direct your choices. The Celestial Watchers have strict protocols about contamination of subject development. But prevention and direction aren't always separate things, are they? If you save me from food poisoning at a conference, maybe I meet someone there who influences my research. If you prevent a car accident, maybe I take a different route that leads me to a different opportunity. Michael's scientific mind was working through the variables, and he didn't like what he was finding. How can I know what's me and what's just the butterfly effect of your protection? Because, Lyra said firmly, I have watched you make thousands of choices over 8 years, and every single one of them reflected the kind of person you are. I cannot protect you from heartbreak, or from professional setbacks, or from the daily frustrations of human existence. I can only prevent external forces from ending your life before you've had a chance to live it. She shifted on the couch, meeting his eyes directly. Michael, I have observed you choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier, choosing truth when lies would be more convenient, choosing to persist when giving up would be more logical. No external force can create those qualities in someone. They come from who you are. The conviction in her voice was oddly reassuring, but Michael still felt like he was looking at his entire life through a funhouse mirror. What about you? How much choice have you had in all this? What do you mean? You said you're part of something called the Celestial Watchers. Did you volunteer to spend 8 years watching over one random human, or were you assigned to me? Lyra's expression became guarded, and Michael realized he'd hit on something significant. Assignments are made based on compatibility between guardian and subject. The process involves extensive analysis of personality matrices and behavioral patterns. That's not really an answer. I was selected for this assignment because my psychological profile suggested I would be effective at protecting someone with your particular combination of curiosity and self-endangering behavior. Michael studied her face, reading the careful word choices and diplomatic evasions. You were assigned to me, weren't you? This wasn't your choice any more than being protected was mine. Michael. How many other people are you monitoring? How many other humans have guardian angels they don't know about? The details of Celestial Watcher operations are classified. That's not what I'm asking. Michael set down the first aid supplies and looked at her directly. I'm asking whether you're here because you want to be, or because someone told you to be. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, and Michael could see her wrestling with something that looked like internal conflict. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was assigned to monitor you initially. But assignments are typically rotated every 2 years to prevent. She paused, searching for the right words. To prevent guardians from developing inappropriate emotional attachments to their subjects. But you've been watching me for 8 years. Yes. Why weren't you rotated? Lyra's violet eyes met his, and in them he saw something that looked like vulnerability mixed with defiance. Because I requested to remain on assignment. Multiple times. Against the recommendations of my supervisors. The implications of that admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like distant conversations, and Michael realized that his isolated cabin suddenly felt less lonely than it had in years. "Lyra," he said carefully, "when you say inappropriate emotional attachments." "I mean," she said, her voice growing stronger, "that watching someone for 8 years, seeing them at their best and worst, understanding their dreams and fears and the way they think, it becomes difficult to maintain professional detachment." "Difficult how?" "Difficult because when you were sick with pneumonia 3 years ago, I sat invisible in your bedroom for 4 days making sure you kept breathing. Difficult because when Sarah Williams broke your heart, I wanted to tell you that you deserved someone who appreciated your dedication to your work instead of resenting it. Difficult because..." She stopped, looking away. "Because what?" "Because when you talk to the stars, sometimes I pretend you're talking to me." The confession hung between them like a revelation, and Michael realized that the most extraordinary thing that had happened tonight wasn't discovering that aliens existed, it was learning that one of them had been caring about him, really caring about him, for longer than most of his human relationships had lasted. "Lyra," he said softly, "I think we need to talk about what happens next." But before she could respond, a soft chiming sound filled the cabin, and Lyra's expression shifted to alarm as she looked toward the forest where her damaged spacecraft lay hidden among the trees. "They're coming," she whispered. "My people are coming, and when they find me here, everything changes." The arrival of Lyra's people wasn't announced by dramatic music or flashing lights, it was heralded by Michael's coffee mug spontaneously levitating 3 inches off his kitchen table and hovering there with the kind of casual defiance of physics that suggested advanced technology was nearby. Lyra immediately tensed, her violet eyes tracking movements Michael couldn't see. "How many?" he asked, surprised by his own calm. "2. Commander Zeph and Scout Vera." Lyra struggled to stand, still weak from her injuries. "Michael, you need to understand, they're not here to rescue me. They're here to clean up what they'll consider a contamination event." Before Michael could ask what that meant, his front door opened without anyone touching it, and 2 figures stepped into his cabin with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they'd been monitoring the situation for some time. Commander Zeph looked like someone had designed the perfect alien authority figure and then given him the personality of a cosmic parking meter. His skin was a metallic blue that reflected the cabin's light in geometric patterns, his eyes were the pale gold of distant stars, and he wore what appeared to be a uniform cut from crystallized space itself. Everything about him radiated efficiency, competence, and the complete absence of anything resembling a sense of humor. Scout Vera, by contrast, looked like she couldn't be older than 16 in human years, with pale green skin covered in intricate silver markings and large dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But there was something about her expression that suggested her youthful appearance was either deceptive or irrelevant to her actual capabilities. "Guardian Lyra," Commander Zeph said without preamble, his voice carrying the kind of flat authority that made it clear he'd had this conversation before. "You have violated containment protocols, exposed classified operations to an uncleared subject, and compromised an assignment that took 12 years to establish. Please explain your actions." "I was injured and required immediate medical attention," Lyra replied, moving to stand between Michael and the newcomers. "Dr. Kane provided assistance and deserves an explanation for what he's witnessed." "Dr. Kane," Commander Zeph said, turning his attention to Michael with the expression of someone examining an interesting but ultimately disposable specimen, "is a subject under protection, not a colleague entitled to operational briefings." Michael had spent enough time in academic hierarchies to recognize bureaucratic authority when he saw it, and something about Commander Zeph's tone activated every rebellious instinct he'd developed during years of dealing with university administrators. "Actually," Michael said, "Dr. Kane is standing right here and perfectly capable of speaking for himself. Also, I believe the polite thing to do when entering someone's home uninvited is to introduce yourself." Scout Vera made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter, while Commander Zeph's expression suggested he was recalibrating his assessment of the situation. "I am Commander Zeph of the Celestial Watchers," he said with the patience of someone explaining things to a particularly slow child. "This is Scout Vera. We are here to retrieve Guardian Lyra and restore proper protocols to this protection assignment. What kind of protocols? Michael asked. Memory modification to remove evidence of contact, reassignment of Guardian Lyra to a different subject, and installation of automated monitoring systems to replace direct observation. The casual way he delivered this information, as if erasing someone's memories was routine paperwork, made Michael's stomach clench. You want to wipe my memory of meeting Lyra? Standard procedure for contamination events, Commander Zeph confirmed. The arrival of Lyra's people wasn't announced by dramatic music or flashing lights, it was heralded by Michael's coffee mug spontaneously levitating 3 inches off his kitchen table and hovering there with the kind of casual defiance of physics that suggested advanced technology was nearby. Lyra immediately tensed, her violet eyes tracking movements Michael couldn't see. How many? He asked, surprised by his own calm. 2. Commander Zeph and Scout Vera. Lyra struggled to stand, still weak from her injuries. Michael, you need to understand, they're not here to rescue me. They're here to clean up what they'll consider a contamination event. Before Michael could ask what that meant, his front door opened without anyone touching it, and 2 figures stepped into his cabin with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they'd been monitoring the situation for some time. Commander Zeph looked like someone had designed the perfect alien authority figure and then given him the personality of a cosmic parking meter. His skin was a metallic blue that reflected the cabin's light in geometric patterns, his eyes were the pale gold of distant stars, and he wore what appeared to be a uniform cut from crystallized space itself. Everything about him radiated efficiency, competence, and the complete absence of anything resembling a sense of humor. Scout Vera, by contrast, looked like she couldn't be older than 16 in human years, with pale green skin covered in intricate silver markings and large dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But there was something about her expression that suggested her youthful appearance was either deceptive or irrelevant to her actual capabilities. Guardian Lyra, Commander Zeph said without preamble, his voice carrying the kind of flat authority that made it clear he'd had this conversation before. You have violated containment protocols, exposed classified operations to an uncleared subject, and compromised an assignment that took 12 years to establish. Please explain your actions. I was injured and required immediate medical attention, Lyra replied, moving to stand between Michael and the newcomers. Dr. Kane provided assistance and deserves an explanation for what he's witnessed. Dr. Kane, Commander Zeph said, turning his attention to Michael with the expression of someone examining an interesting but ultimately disposable specimen, is a subject under protection, not a colleague entitled to operational briefings. Michael had spent enough time in academic hierarchies to recognize bureaucratic authority when he saw it, and something about Commander Zeph's tone activated every rebellious instinct he'd developed during years of dealing with university administrators. Actually, Michael said, Dr. Kane is standing right here and perfectly capable of speaking for himself. Also, I believe the polite thing to do when entering someone's home uninvited is to introduce yourself. Scout Vera made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter, while Commander Zeph's expression suggested he was recalibrating his assessment of the situation. I am Commander Zeph of the Celestial Watchers, he said with the patience of someone explaining things to a particularly slow child. This is Scout Vera. We are here to retrieve Guardian Lyra and restore proper protocols to this protection assignment. What kind of protocols? Michael asked. Memory modification to remove evidence of contact, reassignment of Guardian Lyra to a different subject, and installation of automated monitoring systems to replace direct observation. The casual way he delivered this information, as if erasing someone's memories was routine paperwork, made Michael's stomach clench. You want to wipe my memory of meeting Lyra? Standard procedure for contamination events, Commander Zeph confirmed. Don't worry, the process is entirely painless and leaves no lasting psychological effects. You'll remember tonight as an ordinary evening of research work. And what happens to Lyra? Guardian Lyra will be reassigned to a new subject after undergoing retraining to address the emotional attachment issues that led to this incident. Michael looked at Lyra, who was staring at the floor with an expression of resigned defeat, and felt something crystallize in his chest that might have been protective anger. "No," he said. Commander Zeph blinked his golden eyes with the expression of someone who had just heard a table try to negotiate. "Excuse me?" I said no. I don't consent to having my memory modified, I don't agree to having Lyra reassigned, and I definitely don't want automated systems replacing someone who's been caring about my welfare for 8 years. Dar. Kane, Scout Vera said, speaking for the first time with a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with quantum mathematics, "You don't understand the situation. Celestial Watcher operations span multiple galaxies and protect thousands of developing species. Individual preferences cannot be allowed to compromise system-wide security." "Then maybe," Michael said, his scientist brain engaging with the fascinating organizational problem they were presenting, "your system has some fundamental design flaws." The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or explosions. Commander Zeph and Scout Vera exchanged glances that seemed to involve several layers of nonverbal communication, while Lyra stared at Michael with an expression of horror mixed with admiration. "Design flaws?" Commander Zeph repeated. "You have an organizational structure that depends on emotional detachment, but you're assigning individuals to long-term care relationships with other sentient beings. That's like trying to run a hospital where the doctors aren't allowed to care whether their patients live or die." Michael found himself pacing, his mind racing through the implications. "No wonder Lyra developed feelings for me. You created a system that virtually guarantees emotional investment and then punishes people for responding naturally to it." Scout Vera tilted her head with the expression of someone encountering a fascinating new puzzle. "Are you suggesting that emotional attachment between guardians and subjects is inevitable rather than pathological?" "I'm suggesting that if you want people to effectively protect someone for years at a time, you probably want them to actually care about that person's well-being. Emotional investment isn't a bug in your system, it's a feature." Commander Zeph's expression had shifted from bureaucratic authority to genuine confusion. The Devourers didn't announce their arrival with dramatic special effects or ominous music, they simply made the world wrong. The shadows in Michael's cabin began moving independently of their light sources, the temperature dropped to just above freezing despite the working heater, and every electronic device in the house started displaying static that formed patterns too organized to be random. Most disturbing of all, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of hopelessness settling over him like a weighted blanket made of existential despair. "How many?" Commander Zeph asked, his bureaucratic demeanor instantly replaced by military precision. "3, Scout Vera replied, her youthful appearance now clearly revealed as camouflage for someone with serious combat experience. "Standard hunting pack. They've been tracking Lyra's emotional resonance for approximately 6 hours. What exactly are Devourers?" Michael asked, trying to maintain scientific objectivity while fighting the growing certainty that nothing he'd ever done mattered and nothing he could do would make any difference. "Interdimensional parasites that feed on psychic energy," Lyra explained, moving closer to him as the temperature continued to drop. "They're attracted to strong emotional bonds between sentient beings. The deeper the connection, the more powerful the energy they can harvest. So basically," Michael said, his breath beginning to fog in the suddenly arctic air, "we're dealing with cosmic emotional vampires who are here because you and I care about each other." "That's actually not an inaccurate description," Commander Zeph admitted. Michael found himself laughing, though it came out sounding slightly hysterical. "Perfect. My first contact with alien life involves bureaucratic protocols, organizational psychology, and interdimensional monsters who eat feelings. At least it's consistent with my academic career, lots of paperwork and existential threats." The laughter seemed to push back against the wave of despair, and Michael noticed that the shadows retreated slightly when he made the joke. "Wait, they feed on emotional energy, but they seem to be weakened by humor." "Humor requires hope," Scout Vera observed, pulling what looked like a crystalline weapon from somewhere in her uniform. "Hope is antithetical to their feeding patterns." "Then we need to get to the observatory," Michael said, the scientist in him immediately jumping to practical solutions. "The radio telescope array could amplify any psychic energy we generate, and if we can broadcast a signal strong enough. You're suggesting we turn your research facility into a psychic beacon? Commander Zeph asked. I'm suggesting we use it to call for help. If the Celestial Watchers monitor multiple species across multiple galaxies, someone out there must have dealt with devourers before. As they prepared to leave the cabin, the shadows began coalescing into shapes that hurt to look at directly, forms that existed partially outside normal spacetime and seemed to absorb light, heat, and hope with equal efficiency. Michael felt his earlier confidence evaporating as the hopelessness intensified, making every step toward the door feel like struggling through emotional quicksand. Michael, Lyra said, taking his hand, I need you to listen to me. When I link with you to amplify the psychic beacon, you're going to experience every moment I've watched over you. Not just the dramatic rescues, but everything. 8 years of caring about you. Is that dangerous? It might be overwhelming. Human minds aren't designed to process that much emotional data at once. But it's the only way to generate enough psychic energy to reach the Watcher fleet. The journey to the observatory took place in a running battle through a forest that had become actively hostile. Trees seemed to lean inward to block their path, the ground shifted unpredictably underfoot, and the devourers harassed them with waves of existential dread that made every step feel like a betrayal of basic survival instincts. Michael found that the only way to maintain forward momentum was to focus on the absurdity of his situation, discussing research methodology while fleeing interdimensional predators, debating organizational psychology while aliens shot energy weapons at living shadows. This is either going to be the greatest scientific paper ever written or the most creative suicide note in academic history, he gasped as they reached the observatory. The devourers had apparently been studying human architecture, because they began systematically shutting down the facility's power systems while simultaneously manifesting inside the building as patches of absolute darkness that moved with predatory intelligence. Michael and the 3 Watchers found themselves trapped in the main control room, surrounded by monsters that existed primarily as the absence of everything good about the universe. Now or never, Lyra said, moving to the radio telescope controls with hands that glowed with soft silver light. Michael, are you ready? I have no idea what I'm ready for, but let's find out. When Lyra established the psychic link, Michael's consciousness exploded outward through 8 years of hidden devotion. He experienced every moment she had watched over him, not as memories, but as lived experience filled with her emotions, her thoughts, her growing attachment to someone she was supposed to protect but never supposed to love. He felt her panic during his pneumonia, when she had to choose between maintaining professional distance and making sure he didn't die alone in his apartment. He experienced her quiet pride when his research papers were published, her frustration when other humans failed to appreciate his kindness, her loneliness during the long nights when she sat invisible in his presence, wanting to comfort him but forbidden from making contact. Most overwhelming of all, he felt the moment she had fallen in love with him, not a dramatic revelation, but a gradual recognition that caring for someone's well-being had transformed into caring for their happiness, their dreams, their place in the universe. The psychic energy generated by their connection, amplified by the radio telescope array and powered by 8 years of accumulated love, created a beacon that reached beyond the local galaxy. Within moments, responses began arriving from across the cosmos. Not just from the Celestial Watchers, but from dozens of species who had developed their own solutions to the devourer problem. The creatures of living darkness retreated as the control room filled with light that carried messages of hope, cooperation, and the fierce joy that sentient beings felt when they discovered they weren't alone in the universe. Michael found himself laughing through tears as alien voices speaking dozens of languages all conveyed the same essential message: you are not alone. We are here. We will help. Commander Zeph, meanwhile, was having what appeared to be the most productive crisis of his career. Faced with evidence that emotional attachment between guardians and subjects could generate psychic energy powerful enough to drive off interdimensional predators, he had apparently decided to embrace radical organizational change with the same systematic efficiency he'd previously applied to enforcing regulations. Guardian Lyra, he announced as the devourers fled back to whatever dimension they'd emerged from, I am promoting you to the newly created position of cultural liaison, first class. Your assignment is to establish protocols for ethical emotional attachment between watchers and protected subjects, using your relationship with Dr. Kane as a pilot program. And what's my official designation in this pilot program? Michael asked, still processing the overwhelming experience of feeling 8 years of alien devotion downloaded directly into his consciousness. Partner, Lyra said simply, her violet eyes bright with tears that seemed to catch and reflect starlight. You're my partner in figuring out how to care for someone without controlling them, how to protect someone while still allowing them to grow. Scout Vera, who had been monitoring the galactic communications throughout the crisis, looked up from her instruments with an expression of amazement. The response to your psychic beacon has been extraordinary. We're receiving communications from species we haven't heard from in centuries, all offering to share their experience with guardian-subject emotional bonding. It appears you've accidentally started the largest interspecies psychology conference in galactic history. Michael looked around the observatory control room, taking in the alien technology now seamlessly integrated with human instruments, the messages of support streaming in from across the galaxy, and the woman whose 8 years of secret devotion had just transformed the fundamental nature of interstellar protection protocols. You know, he said to Lyra, when I was a kid, I used to wish for someone who would watch over me, care about what happened to me, maybe even love me enough to keep me safe. I just never imagined that wish would come true in the form of an interdimensional bureaucracy reform movement. Lyra laughed, the sound carrying the kind of joy that made the remaining shadows flee from the corners of the room. Michael Kane, in 8 years of watching over you, I learned that you have an extraordinary talent for finding the most complicated possible way to achieve simple objectives. Is that a complaint? It's an observation, she said, moving closer to him as alien ships began appearing in Earth's sky, drawn by their beacon of hope and cooperation. And it's one of the things I love most about you. As the first official interstellar diplomatic contact began with representatives from a dozen species arriving to discuss the implications of emotionally invested protection protocols, Michael realized that his quiet life of astronomical research had transformed into something far more extraordinary than he'd ever imagined. He'd gone from talking to the stars to helping establish the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation based on the radical concept that caring about someone made you better at protecting them, not worse. Standing beside Lyra in the observatory that had become the site of first contact, watching ships from across the galaxy arrive to begin formal diplomatic relations, Michael reflected on the journey from secret guardian to open partnership. The greatest protection, he realized, wasn't shielding someone from all danger, it was caring enough about them to stand with them when they faced the inevitable challenges of growth, discovery, and building relationships that spanned the spaces between stars. Their love story had become the foundation for a new understanding of what it meant to watch over someone, proving that sometimes the most important revelations come not from distant galaxies, but from finally understanding that someone has been caring about you all along.